In 2003, a man who had once held the entire world in his fists filed for bankruptcy. Not struggling to pay rent bankruptcy. Not missed a few bills bankruptcy. $23 million in debt bankruptcy. The kind of financial collapse so complete, so total, that accountants who reviewed his books reportedly couldn't believe what they were looking at. This was Mike Tyson, the most feared heavyweight boxer alive, a man who had earned over $400 million in his career, and somehow, impossibly, ended up with less than nothing. He had bought mansions. He had purchased exotic tigers as pets. He had spent $2 million, $2 million, on a single bathtub, and before you shake your head and tell yourself you would never do that, I want you to sit with a more uncomfortable question. Are you completely sure? Because the decisions that destroyed Mike Tyson's finances were not the decisions of a stupid man. They were the decisions of a human being operating on emotion, ego, and a set of beliefs about money that no one had ever challenged. And that is exactly the kind of person most of us are when it comes to money. Whether we are earning $40,000 a year or $400 million. Today I want to take you through 5 of the most quietly devastating insights from one of the most important books written about money in the last decade. Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money. Not the insights that confirm what you already believe. The ones that are genuinely difficult to sit with. The ones that, if you actually absorb them, will change the way you make decisions for the rest of your life. Insight 1. You are not fully in control. Let's start with the one that makes almost everyone defensive. You are not fully in control of where you end up. And I don't mean that in a defeatist way. I mean it in the way that actually sets you free if you let it. There is a version of Bill Gates' story that gets told constantly. The genius who saw the future, built an empire, and changed the world through sheer intelligence and relentless work. All of that is true. But there is a part of the story that almost never gets told. Bill Gates attended one of the only high schools in the entire United States, in the 1960s, that had a computer. Not one of the best equipped schools, one of the only schools, full stop. At a time when computers were the size of rooms and cost more than houses, a 13-year-old Bill Gates had access to one. That single fact, that one accident of geography and timing, altered the entire trajectory of what became the most valuable technology company in human history. He had a best friend in high school named Kent Evans, every bit as brilliant, every bit as obsessed with computers, every bit as hungry to build something that mattered. Before they could graduate, Kent died in a mountaineering accident. His story ended at 17. Gates's story became legend. Same intelligence, same drive, radically different outcomes. The lesson here is not that hard work doesn't matter. It does. The lesson is that we spend enormous energy studying successful people's choices while completely ignoring the invisible forces, the timing, the geography, the coincidences, the close calls, that shape the outcome alongside those choices. We look at someone who made it and think, I just need to do what they did. But we are always missing the luck they will never fully admit to, and the risk that for someone else with the exact same plan, swallowed everything. This changes the way you should think about both success and failure. When things go well, hold the win with a little humility. When things fall apart, hold the loss with a little mercy, for yourself and for others, because neither one is ever the full story. Insight 2. Getting wealthy and staying wealthy are opposite. Skills. Now let's talk about the thing that separates the people who build wealth from the people who build it and then lose it. Because these are genuinely 2 different skills, and almost nobody talks about them that way. Getting wealthy and staying wealthy require opposite mindsets. Getting wealthy demands a certain kind of controlled recklessness. It demands that you take risks other people are too cautious to take. Bet on yourself when the outcome is genuinely uncertain, and sustain optimism long enough to survive the inevitable periods when everything looks like it's failing. Jeff Bezos quit a prestigious Wall Street job to sell books from a garage. Elon Musk took the entirety of his PayPal payout and poured it into Tesla and SpaceX simultaneously, and came within weeks of watching both collapse. Every origin story of extraordinary wealth has a moment like this. A moment where the rational choice was to stop and the person kept going anyway. That mentality works brilliantly on the way up. It becomes catastrophic if you never put it down. In November 2022, a man named Sam Bankman-Fried was worth $26 billion. He had built FTX into one of the largest crypto exchanges on the planet in under 4 years. He was on the cover of magazines. He was being discussed as the next Warren Buffett. By December, he had been arrested. The exchange had collapsed. The billions were gone. What happened? He never shifted gears. He kept playing offense when the game required defense. He kept making the aggressive, high-risk bets that had gotten him in the game long after those bets had become threats rather than opportunities. Now look at the man whose name kept coming up while Bankman-Fried's empire was burning. Warren Buffett is worth over $100 billion. And here is the thing about his strategy that surprises almost everyone when they actually study it. It is not flashy. He does not chase the highest returns. He does not invest in the next revolutionary thing. He does not make bold, concentrated bets on paradigm-shifting technology. His secret, if you can call it that, is almost embarrassingly simple. He refuses to lose. He hates the feeling of losing money more than he loves the feeling of gaining it, and he has structured his entire financial life around protecting himself from catastrophic downside. And because he has never been wiped out, because he has survived every crash, every recession, every market collapse for over 60 years, compound interest has had the time to do what it does when you give it enough runway. It becomes incomprehensible. The goal is never to make money once. The goal is to still be in the game when it matters. Insight 3, save money, but not for the reasons you think. This brings us to the insight that sounds obvious until you really examine what it means. But not for the reasons you've been told. The traditional argument for saving is that you are deferring pleasure, denying yourself something now so you can have something bigger later. A nicer car, a better vacation, a more comfortable retirement. And while none of that is wrong, it completely misses the most powerful thing that savings actually give you. Savings give you options, and options, in a world you cannot fully control, are the closest thing to genuine power that most people will ever hold. There is a story in this book about a man stuck in a job that was quietly destroying him. Toxic management, brutal hours, a culture that valued output over humanity. He knew it. Everyone around him knew it. But he could not leave because leaving required money he did not have. Every morning he walked into that building was not a choice. It was a sentence. Now place a different person in the same situation. Same terrible job, same suffocating culture. But this person had spent 3 years building a financial cushion. When the job became unbearable, they left. Not with drama, not with crisis, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew they had time to figure out what came next. The difference between those two lives is not income. It is not talent. It is the presence or absence of what some people call an FU fund, a reserve of money whose entire purpose is to give you the ability to walk away from things that are wrong for you. The freedom to say no, the luxury of time. You do not need to be wealthy to build this. You need to be consistent. 6 months of living expenses, sitting untouched in an account changes your psychology in ways that are almost impossible to describe until you experience them. The anxiety that hums underneath daily life at a frequency so constant you've stopped noticing it. It quits. Not because your income changed, because your options did. Insight 4. Wealth is invisible. The deepest, most counterintuitive insight in this entire book is the one that most directly challenges the way we have been trained to think about wealth. Since the moment we were old enough to watch advertisements, wealth is invisible, and the things that look like wealth almost never are. In 2014, a man named Ronald Reed died in Vermont. He had worked most of his life as a janitor and a gas station attendant. He drove a car that needed jumper cables to start. He wore the same threadbare coat for years and held it together with a safety pin when the zipper broke. His neighbors described him as a pleasant, quiet man who lived modestly and asked for very little. When he died at 92, his estate was valued at $8 million. It had accumulated quietly, invisibly, over decades. Dividend-paying stocks held and reinvested with patience. Most investors cannot sustain for 8 months, let alone 8 decades. $8 million. in an account no one knew about, behind a face that no one would have looked at twice. Now contrast that with what we actually treat as evidence of wealth. The car that costs more than most people's houses. The watch that exists primarily to be seen. The vacation posted not because you want to remember it, but because you want someone else to see it happening. None of these things are evidence of wealth. They are evidence of spending. And spending is, by definition, the movement of money away from you. Real wealth is always the money that didn't leave. The investment that compounded quietly in the background. The emergency fund that was never touched. The paid-off debt. The options you preserved by choosing not to perform your financial status for an audience that, in most cases, wasn't really paying attention anyway. Warren Buffett has lived in the same house in Omaha, Nebraska since 1958. He paid $31,000 for it. He could, at this point, subpurchase the surrounding several square miles without meaningfully impacting his net worth. He stays because he has long understood something. Most people spend their entire financial lives failing to grasp that the display of wealth and the accumulation of wealth are not just different things, they are opposing forces. Every dollar spent performing wealth is a dollar withdrawn from building it. Insight 5. Money is emotion, not math. The last insight is the one that the financial industry has the least interest in telling you, which is probably why it took a book like this to articulate it so clearly. Money is not math. Money is emotion, and the most rational financial plan in the world is worth exactly nothing if you cannot sustain it through the moments when your emotions are screaming at you to abandon it. Think about what happens during a market crash. The logical thing, the statistically, historically, mathematically correct thing, is to hold. To stay calm, stay invested, and allow time to do what time reliably does to diversified, long-term investments. Every financial advisor will tell you this. Every dataset in history confirms it. And yet, when portfolios drop 40% in 3 months, millions of people sell. They do not sell because they are stupid. They sell because they are human. Because watching numbers that represent your security, your future, your children's future, fall by almost half triggers something so deep and so visceral that intellectual knowledge about long-term market patterns provides almost no comfort at all. This is why the author makes a distinction that I think is genuinely important. The difference between being rational and being reasonable. Rational is the strategy with the highest mathematical return. Reasonable is the strategy you can actually live with. The one that lets you sleep, that doesn't produce enough anxiety to make you do something destructive. That works not just on a spreadsheet, but in the real conditions of a real human life. A friend of the author spent years trying to build the perfect investment strategy. Hours of research, books read, spreadsheets built, return scenarios modeled. And then he never invested a single dollar, because the paralysis produced by trying to optimize everything became its own form of financial failure. Meanwhile, someone who put money into a basic index fund and simply never looked at it again outperformed him. Not because the strategy was better, because it was actually executed. The best financial plan is not the one that produces the highest theoretical return. It is the one you will still be following in 20 years. The one built for you, for your actual psychology, your actual risk tolerance, your actual capacity to sit with uncertainty, because money, at the end of every calculation, is not a math problem. It is a human one. Closing. What money is actually for, and the humans who figure that out early enough. The ones who stop performing wealth and start building it, who understand that the invisible account is more valuable than the visible car, who know when to take risk and when to protect what they have, who build savings not for things but for options, who invest not in the highest returning strategy but in the one they can sustain. Those are the people who look, at the end of a long life, like miracles. They are not miracles. They just learned, earlier than most, what money actually is and what it is actually for. It is not a measure of your worth. It is not a performance for other people. It is not a scoreboard. It is, at its most essential, a tool for building a life in which you are not owned by circumstances you could have prepared for, where a bad month at work does not become a catastrophe, where an opportunity you want to take does not require you to ask someone else for permission. Where the version of your future you actually want remains, always within reach. That is what this book is about. Not returns, not strategies, not tips, the psychology, the part nobody talks about, because it is the hardest part, and because understanding it costs the financial industry money. They would rather keep making off your confusion. Now you are less confused. What you do next is up to you. If one of these insights hit differently than you expected, leave it in the comments, not as a performance. Because naming the thing you needed to hear is how you make sure you don't forget it. And if someone in your life is stuck in the cycle of looking rich while moving further from actually being it, share this with them, because this is the conversation that changes things.